What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Damon Burton. You can check him out at SEOnational.com. And Damon, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Since this is part of the Top Agencies series, I had Kevin Hurrigan of Spinutech. He had an agency, started his agency in 1995. So it was really interesting, Damon, to hear the evolution of the internet space, the business world, and the agency space since 1995. So that was an interesting episode. Also had Todd Taskey on. Todd Taskey helps match agencies with private equity. He has a Second Bite podcast, the Second Bite, because he'll help agencies sell. And then if private equity sells again, sometimes they make more on the second bite than they do on the first. So again, talked about the M&A space, valuation space, agency space. He has an interesting perspective on that as well. So that and many more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise25. At Rise25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So, Damon, we call ourselves the magic elves that are running in the background to make it look easy for the host so they can create amazing content, create amazing relationships, most importantly, run their business. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships, and I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. Actually, Damon feels the same way. It's a weird thing about giving without expecting anything in return. So I have found no better way over the past 15 years to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And a big shout out to Jamshidi. He introduced Damon and I. He's amazing. You could check him out at CJAM marketing.com. He's a marketing matchmaker. So he helps companies find a perfect agency to fit their needs. So you could check him out. But a little bit about Damon. I'm excited to chat. And over a decade ago, Damon Burton beat $1 billion company. He did that by outranking them on Google. And he has some really good stories about getting clients, which we'll dig into. And he knew he was onto something. And he's gone on to build an international search engine marketing company. They've worked with NBA teams, Inc. 5000, and Shark Tank featured businesses, and many more. He founded the company in 2007. He also writes for Forbes. He's been featured in publications like USA Weekly and many more, and has helped many high-profile clients make more in a month than they used to sometimes in a year. So, Damon, thanks for joining me.
Jeremy, I'm excited to chat. There's so much you covered. I want to go back and hit on all of it, but we'll see where we go.
Yeah. So we'll start with SEO National and what you do. And I'm going to share your website as we're doing it. So if people are listening to the audio, there was a video component. So tell people a little bit about SEO National.
Yeah, so it's an agency I founded, like you said, 2007. So going on nearly 2 decades. And I knew early on, we'll probably talk a lot about entrepreneurship. And so for me, in the beginning of my entrepreneurship, the one thing that I did know was I didn't want to be an agency that offered it all. And so we'll probably unpack how I got into SEO. But once I started to go down that path, I said, let's see if that's my thing. And 17 years later, I ended up working with lots of cool people. You can see right there on Russell Brunson. I'm actually at Russell Brunson's headquarters right now as we record this. I'm at ClickFunnels in Boise. Working with him, work with Tony Robbins. But in addition to these like big cool names, some of my favorite stories are the mom and pops. We've taken a lot of clients. We still have our first client from 17 years ago with us from day one. And it's cool to see these family started businesses literally from kitchen tables and garages grow into these 50,000 square foot warehouses. And so that's kind of the crash course of what I've been doing the last 17 years, just stayed in my lane of SEO, and it's worked out really well.
One of my favorite stories of yours, which we will get into, is how you got your first client.
Yeah.
But before we get there, I want you to point out you were going to mention about your website when we're on your website.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so we never touched this website, so which is, for being a marketing company is a little bit ironic. And so we get all of our leads currently from referrals and social proof. And so we very rarely do any marketing our own, at least directly. And it's actually intentional because the last thing I want to rank for is the word SEO, which sounds contradictory. But the reason why is because it's an unqualified term, right? And it doesn't tell me if people want to learn SEO. It doesn't tell me if they want to hire SEO. And so there's more to that story. But we haven't touched this website in years. And it was like basically like, let's just make something that's presentable and then good enough. And so now I hired a COO about 2 years ago, and he's gone through the learning curves, and I feel really comfortable with where he's at now. He's been taking over the agency. And so now it's like, well, okay, if we've accomplished this much without doing any direct lead gen advertising, let's see what the next phase is and where that takes us. So, 17 years later, we're finally actually starting to work on building a formal website.
To me, it looks nice. Talk about Outrank for a second. We're looking here, and you have the
Mm.
book Outrank. Love the
Yeah,
title.
thanks. Yeah, Outrank was kind of a passion project. Being in it this long, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions and lies about the world of SEO. And, the problem with optimized content, SEO content that's out there for people to read is it's been optimized. And so it sticks well. And whether that means it maintains its truth over time or not may not necessarily be true. And so you touched on giving without expecting in return. And the way you said it is exactly the way I said it. And so I love how you phrase that. And so how that ties into the book is a lot of times I like to help people, but it's either a mismatch on budget or time frame or whatever. And so I wanted a resource to still be able to help people and go, look, if you can't afford us, but you want to put in the time, this is literally an A to Z blueprint. So the credibility part was just an added bonus. It's taken me a lot of places and closed a lot of deals, but mostly it was to go, look, if you want a fighting chance with against the big boys and you don't have the big boy budget, then put in the time and this will get you there.
I'd love to hear, Damon, some of your favorite books or resources that you've learned from. Obviously we have Outrank here. One of my favorites, when we think of giving without expecting, Brian Kurtz, colleague, friend, wrote Over Deliver, which is a fantastic book. And he talks a lot about his 100-0, which is he just gives, not expecting anything in return. What are some of your favorite books, resources?
Some of the
And
books
obviously, you
that
probably have to mention some Russell Brunson's books. I think I have some of them right over there too. So, but what are some of your favorites?
there's two books that usually come to mind, E-Myth Revisited and 4 Hour Workweek, because they kind of came in a compressed window of time where I was listening to them on audio in a short time frame to, kind of back to back. And the reason why they made a big difference is because E-Myth teaches you to build a business that's dependent on processes, not people. And so that way, as the talent comes and goes, you don't lose that skill set. Instead, you can, interchange and maintain quality control. And then 4 Hour Workweek teaches you basically how to cut corners. And so what was interesting in reading those around the same time is it made me, on the SOP side of things, I had documentation, but some was in my head, some was on a spreadsheet, some was on a doc. And so I was like, okay, this helps me kind of visualize the importance of having it in a consolidated resource. And we talked briefly before we kind of jumped on the recording about the importance of SOPs. And what's fascinating is, especially when you're starting a business, like you don't have more time later, you have less time. And so the thought of doing your SOPs is never going to be easier, but it becomes increasingly important. And so when we did our SOPs, it sucked. Like it just straight up sucked. Like it took like an hour or two every other day for a year. Because for me, we have so many different dynamic situations where a client could be on different platforms. They could be e-commerce, they could be non-e-commerce. The point of me explaining this is that as soon as those SOPs were done, that's really where we started to scale. And then that's when we first had our client, our first client was over $10,000 a month retainer on a single client. And like those are things I wouldn't have felt comfortable bidding on because I knew we couldn't do the quality control at scale. So that's why that book's important. Now, why 4-Hour Workweek was important is because, compressing time is obviously important, or saving time. But what was interesting in reading those two books around the same time is it also made me realize you shouldn't cut corners and do 4-Hour Workweek until you know what your documented processes are and what's at stake. And so if you're going to read them, do E-Myth first, figure out your processes, how to maintain quality control, then figure out where the opportunities to compress time are.
Let's talk about SOPs for a second. And I love this topic actually. And by the way, people, Michael Gerber's book, E-Myth, I did have him on the podcast. So you can check that episode out on Inspired Insider. It's a really great episode. He's got an amazing book. SOPs, how do you house them? What are some of the structure that you use? We use actually Sweet Process, the software. It houses all of our SOPs and makes it very searchable. I had Owen McGab on the show, who's the founder. I love it. So anyways, I'd love to hear how you structure yours.
I was laughing because that was one of the first interviews I ever did, probably like 10 years ago, was with the Sweet Process. Yeah.
Really? Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we use ClickUp, and we put everything in ClickUp. So not only does it house our SOPs, but it's our project management system. And so the way that we built it is if you're familiar with ClickUp,
we use ClickUp also, actually. So, yep.
Yeah. So like for listeners, ClickUp basically has folders and then tasks. And so the way that we built it is we templatized our tasks into basically dummy folders. And so now every time, like instead of having an account and then having to go refer to the documentation, we duplicate the documentation and assign it as a client. And so now every client gets their entire documented list. So now you have we got 200, 300 audit checkpoints for every client we launch. And so now you can launch a project with perfect quality control every time with click of a button. And so it holds our documentation, but then as they read the documentation, they also complete the task. Now, one thing that's interesting that we changed this year is, we've had pretty in-depth SOPs and it's been our superpower for a good 10 years plus. But what was interesting is we ran into a problem earlier this year that I never experienced in running the agency. And so last year we grew a lot. And so I gave the team autonomy to hire and pass the torch and things like that. And I always thought, our SOPs are so dialed in that we can't screw it up. So sure, hire people, do whatever you want. And then all of a sudden I started to notice little things, like little gaps in fulfillment that like we would never miss. And so what had happened was your team will be as good or as bad as the documentation you provide, which I knew that. What I didn't realize was they are also like water and will follow the path of least resistance. And so the missing component was including the why in the documentation. So they had the how, but what was happening was like the metaphor of the path of least resistance is they would do the thing because it said to do the thing, but they didn't understand why they were doing the thing. And so every once in a while, there's these little tiny nuances where there's judgment calls that if you understand the why, you can do that very clearly. But without that, that's where we started to have these gaps. And so I had the team go back and add the why. So now all of our documentation is the same, but now instead of the first paragraph being tactical, first paragraph is here's why you're doing the tactical.
Love it. Yeah, we use ClickUp, love ClickUp for project management, and we will in each task link the Sweet Process SOP in that task. And I like how you said use templates and kind of have checklists and things so people do both. So I love that. What are some of the other tech and tools you use? To use ClickUp. What else as a company is important for you?
So software. So I have a love-hate for software lately because I just recently looked at our P&L. And it was like, holy crap, we spent like $7,000 a month on software. Are you kidding me?
I feel like we just did this analyzation too, and I feel like we realized the sweet spot must be if they charge less than $5,000 a year, it goes under the radar. I'm like, why are all these softwares $5,000 a year?
Yeah.
So I get you.
Yeah, well, it's like sure, we'll use Google Business Apps. It's only like $10 a user, and all of a sudden you got 50 users, and now you're paying like,
It's
so,
6,000 right there. Yeah.
so we got, I mean, we're using Google Business Apps, and so that started originally, obviously for just email, but then we used to have Dropbox, and so I'm like, well, why don't we just get rid of Dropbox and then use the existing Gmail as also Google Storage? So we use Google Business Apps for email and storage communication. Um, we use Slack for communication. We use Figma for design. We use Zoom. We use Acuity for our calendars and appointment bookings. Um, what else do we got? We use another tool called File Stage, which helps which helps streamline the process of clients approving mock-ups and things like that. So instead of emailing mock-ups back and forth, you're like, go check it out here, and you can mark it up and add comments. Yeah, dude, there's probably 20 little
Do
$9
you have
a month
from
softwares.
like an email inbox? Do you have a centralized email inbox, like from a customer support, or how do you handle customer
No,
support
so
stuff?
this is you'll like this, and this is actually really fascinating because we are so good at our SOPs. Part of going a level deeper on SOPs is a lot of people don't realize SOPs can go beyond the tactical. SOPs can be touch points, communications, and customer service. And so we are so good and proactive at setting expectations that I have no project manager. I have no CEO. We have no account reps, but yet we manage like 80 accounts in billion-dollar companies. And it's because what happens is we onboard the account. Well, actually, it starts before the onboarding. It starts in the negotiations. And so it's like, look, here's the rules of engagement. You talk about all the fun stuff, but then you also talk about the boundaries. And so it's like, look, you don't get my cell phone number. We're not available after hours. We don't check emails on weekends. And then when you engage, we send out a proposal. There's a full page in our documentation that says reasons not to hire us. And it's all the things that not only that we want to protect for our own sanity, but also protect to maintain a positive engagement of productivity. Because if you get a client that's calling you every day, you're going to not like them real quick. And if you don't like them, then you're not going to deliver for them as well. And so we set all these rules of engagement, but then we also set expectations. And so then it's like, cool, when we start, your first email is going to be from my COO, and it's going to say this. It's going to set expectations. After that, then you're going to get an intro from my content manager, and she's going to say this. And here's the timeframes that go with that. First week, we're going to do onboarding. Second week, we're going to do research. So if your documentation also includes communication touchpoints, and those communication touchpoints set expectations, you almost everything's proactive, and now there is no need to be reactive.
Talk about the phases for a second. You said onboarding, research. What are the different phases
So an
after
average
that?
account, yeah, like an average launch is like week one's onboarding. And then we say, look, now we're digging in data, so it's going to be quiet for a little bit as we pull data. So then it's like 2 to 3 weeks. We're breaking down their market. We're looking at the competition. We're looking at who their demographics are, their buying avatar, who their ideal consumer is. And then we come back and we go, look, we did all the heavy lifting. Here's where we think the money is. And do you agree? So then we get on the same page. And then after that, it's like, okay, now we need to build out a content strategy. And this is really important for marketers to understand, and especially SEOs or brand and content campaigns, is too many people nowadays, especially with AI, like they just write for the sake of writing. And you should write intentionally. And what your goal should be is your customers have a problem or a pain point, your product or service solves it, your content should bridge the gap in between, right? And so we go through, we map out what are people already asking search engines? And not only what are they already asking, but which of those queries implies buyer intent? Because if we're writing, let's attract people that we can help. Let's not just write to try and game the system. So you're like 4 to 6 weeks in for us just to map out the strategy. And what's also happening in that time is then my developers and my tech team go through and do all the nerdy stuff. They make the page load quicker, they make it mobile friendly, they touch all the things they need to touch. So generally speaking, we're like 6 weeks in just to lay the foundation. And then after that, it's a giant reoccurring content and credibility machine.
Talk about reasons not to hire you. What are a few examples? I mean, you mentioned, if you want to call us, but what are some others?
Yeah, so that's an evolving page in our agreement. And what's interesting is I get more
Every time
call.
someone does something, you keep
Yeah,
adding to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So while I'm talking, I'll try and bring it up, and I know most of it off the top of my head, but there's what's interesting is I get more compliments than complaints about that from the clients. I get more compliments because what happens is when you set these boundaries, these newer entrepreneurs are scared, right? And so everybody wants to take every sale that they can get, and they're afraid to offend the customer. But when you lead and go, this is how to maximize the relationship, then they trust you more as an authority. And when you set boundaries, they respect you more. And so this has probably helped close more deals. I know for certainty it's helped close more deals than repelled. And the 1 out of 20 it repels, that's what it's there for. Right. So here's my list, right?
Yeah.
So one is you're hiring an agency, not an employee. And so in that one, it says, don't tell us what to do.
I think, by the way, David, I want to say these could all be t-shirts, like individual
Yeah,
t-shirts.
yeah,
So anyways, keep going.
yeah, little bumper stickers. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so the first one's like, look, we're experienced experts, and that's why you're coming to us. So let us do that. The next one is you're paying for implementation, not training. Because a lot of times clients will go, well, can I watch? Well, no, because now you're 2x delaying how long this takes, and you're not compensating me for that delay. The third one is SEO is not a quick fix. I consistently reiterate why SEO takes time. Now, the important word I said there is why. Because a lot of people will be like, SEO takes time, it's 12 months, sign my agreement. But they don't explain the why. They don't explain, and this is really important if you're shopping SEO or if you're an SEO agency, how you can help with client retention is it does take time, but if you don't explain why, then people are left hanging because they're paying you lots of money per month, and they're tangibly not seeing anything. And so the way you explain it is progress versus monetization. And what this means is you see progress relatively quickly. You can see progress maybe in a month or two, but progress translates to being on page 12 of Google now to page 9. But there's no monetization because all the traffic's on page 1. That's why SEO takes time, is not to move the needle, but to move it far enough that you can make money. So we explained that. Couple last quick ones are we don't do excessive meetings. So it says we don't do meetings about meetings. I'm going to send you everything you need. I don't need to waste your time. You don't need to waste my time. If you really have an actual question, here's the calendar. Otherwise, we're not scheduling reoccurring meetings. We avoid shiny objects. Read all you want about SEO. Don't tell me about it.
I gotcha. So the voice shining object is like, I've heard this thing. If we put it into Chat GPT and do this, that will help us rank, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's the latest corner cutting thing? Yeah. And then the last one is what I call new sheriff syndrome. So this is when, like, look, your team might change, that's fine. Point of contact might change, that's fine. But two things. One is that doesn't mean we change direction. And two, it's not our responsibility to bring them up to speed. We didn't hire them, you did.
Thanks for sharing that. I love that. One thing that sticks out, and I mentioned the very beginning of this interview, is one of my favorite stories is how you got your first client. And it relates to a no-brainer offer,
Mhm.
right? This is kind of
Yeah.
how you got an SEO, I believe, but talk about what you did. And I think it's really instructive just in general.
Yeah, and don't let me forget to tell you, I did my first live event 2 weeks ago, and people are doing this, and I'll tell you the results from it. So my background was originally in web design, and so I had a client that says, "What do you know about Google?" And so what I told him is, I said, "Look, I think I know enough I can help you, but I don't know enough that I'm confident I can deliver a return. And so morally, I don't feel comfortable charging you, but I also don't want to work for free. So how about we do this? Let me see how far I can get you. If we hit this mutually agreed upon goal, then A, you pay me retroactively for that time, and B, now we start a retainer moving forward." And so you talk about the reason why it's a no-brainer is because now they have nothing to lose. Either they pay nothing or it works and they make money. Now I'm also incentivized to make it work. And so now we both win and we generally both have nothing to lose. And so, I hit those goals. They signed up as a client. Like I said, they're still a client to this day, 17 years later. And then what I was able to do is go to client number two, who was a design client. The client number one had referred, and I was able to go, hey, number two, remember number one? Here's what we just did with them. Do you want to do the same thing? And of course they're like, well, why not? And so we did the same thing with them and hit results from there too. So that's how I got the first client. Now I just did this 2-day training a couple weeks ago, and I talked about this because there was a couple people in the room that do some sort of online services, but not particular SEO, but they've dabbled in it and they find it interesting and they want to do more. And that was their question is, how do I get my first client? And so I told them this. I said, go approach businesses and tell them, look, I'm looking to get into this. Here's my background. And and I'll do it under those circumstances. And one other thing I'll add is I've been mentoring my wife's nephew for 2 years now, and he did this. I'll add one other strategy that new entrepreneurs can do is, you can't optimize a website until you understand how websites are built. So I told him to start by learning design. And we can take the same concept that we talked about getting your first SEO client and apply it with a small tweak to getting your first design clients. So what I told him is I said, "Look, jump on LinkedIn, jump on wherever, and message small businesses and go, look, I'm a new entrepreneur. I do these $500 websites, but I'm going to do it for free." So their alarms are going to go off and go, what's the catch? Why free? But then when you just say, I'm new, I want to build out a portfolio, I want the experience, then their guard comes down and they probably want to help you because entrepreneurs want other entrepreneurs to win. So you do that long enough that you start to feel comfortable with design. Then you go, okay, now I do $1,500 websites for $500. Now you can start to understand the value exchange of money. But then you still have room for error because you explain your learning and you give them a discount. So you do that, and then you can start to convert to the SEO proposition if you want to do SEO. So I explained this at this event, and not even a week later, somebody in the group posts and went, I got my first $7,500 client. That same guy 3 days later goes, I got my second $7,500 client, right? And to your point, it's a no-brainer.
I have interviewed a lot of I geek out on SOPs. The other thing is direct response marketing copywriting. And the best copywriters have a risk reversal, like an offer that has a risk reversal that takes the risk off the client. That's exactly what you did. Then you went to the second one and just said, hey, look at the social proof I have. I can help you. It seems it's like a no-brainer path. And it's also a give, right? So like you're
Mhm.
both aligned in the outcome there. So yes, I love that story. Thanks for sharing. You have a lot of cool stories. We won't get into all of them, but there's a cool one that involves an apron. I think we won't get into that one.
Yeah.
They could listen. Someone could listen to that one some other time. But it was really just offering your help because you couldn't find an item that was at a kiosk and you couldn't find it online. So like if you sniffed out a problem that you saw and you just offered to help. And so I love that the person didn't even know how, like they were losing the revenue. But
I'll
go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, I won't unpack the whole thing, but I'll add one thing,
Yeah.
one small comment on that story is because I made the effort to help that person, they became a client. And when they became a client, they became an advocate. And that was in the infancy of my agency. And that one person for probably the next 4 years sent 25% of all my business.
It's amazing. And let's talk about mentors for a second. I mean, it's interesting. You attended a ClickFunnels or Funnel Hacking Live, and you went in to get just an upgrade to your seating.
Wasn't even
And
that.
yeah, so and then tell people what happened there. And I think I want to just have you talk about the reason, right? And why you were doing that, because I think that's really instructive. But talk about that story um, where you went to do that.
So I went to Funnel Hacking Live, which is an event that Russell Brunson that runs ClickFunnels puts on. It's a massive event. It's like 5,000 people. And I went with a friend of mine who was well known in the community. And, the ClickFunnels world is largely paid traffic, and I'm not paid traffic. So I went just to go, you know, like we talked about my website, right? We're starting to look into growing in other ways other than just referrals. And so I just went to fill it out. And I knew it was like a cool event and as far as vibe and things like that. And my friend had early access, and early access just lets you go through this like sash and get a seat like 5 minutes earlier than everybody else. So I was following my friend around everywhere and I couldn't go past this invisible sash. And it pissed me off so much. Not because I cared for the seats or, the snacks that were behind it. I just wanted to hang out with my friends because it was him and there were other friends back there. And so I went and asked the customer service person and I said, look, I don't expect anything for free. Can I pay for this early access? And all it was like a red wristband versus a blue wristband. And in my mind, I'm like,
It's
okay,
like the
like how,
Matrix. You chose the blue. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, I'm like in my mind, I'm like, how far am I willing to take this? I'm like, okay, I'd pay $1,000 for this wristband. And so they go, I don't know, go talk to the people over there. And so I go talk to people over there and they said, no, that's just for people that have won awards or in our coaching programs. And I said, oh, okay. And well, what's the coaching programs? And they said, well, let me call this one guy over. And so their sales guy comes over and he's like, what's going on? And I said, my friend's over there. And he goes, yeah, you're not going over there unless you're, same thing, coaching program or award winner. He goes, are you interested in coaching? And I said, honestly, no. And he says, well, what about a mastermind? And I said, maybe. And he goes, all right, it's this and this and this, and it's 50 grand. So in my mind, I'm like, holy crap, how did I just go from $1,000 to 50 grand? And but the decision was surprisingly short. It was like a 20-second dialogue in my head where it was like, this is why I'm here, is to compress time. And so seems like an opportunity. And so I gave him the $5,000 deposit or whatever it is, made a $50,000 purchase out of nowhere, got a hoodie, went back to the hotel room, and I said, "Babe, guess how
You
much this
better
hoodie
wear that
cost?"
hoodie all the time now.
I do
Yeah.
still wear it. And so I ended up joining Russell Brunson's inner circle. And what's come from that? I even remember that night at the hotel, I ordered my friend who I went, his name was Josh 40. Him and I are still good friends. And I remember going to the hotel that night and there's this client of ours that mails cookies, and I ordered these cookies and sent them to Josh. And I said, hey, I don't know what's to come of this, but I think this is probably gonna, you letting me tag along with you, I think is gonna lead to something that changes my trajectory. Now, fast forward a couple years, Russell Brunson, like I said, I'm at ClickFunnels right now. Russell Brunson is still in his mastermind, but now he's also a client. The credibility and the networking that's come from that has allowed me to pick up other great clients like Tony Robbins. Um, and people come to me instead of me having to go to other people now. And some of the, seeing just some of the things, I'm really proud of what I've accomplished, but when you are around these other people, there's more than once where I'm like, oh, that's cool that I did that in a year. And they're like, oh yeah, you could do that like in a day, right? Like what? So that's the $50,000 bracelet story. It actually inspired a book too. There's a book called Inside the Inner Circle, that was birthed from that story where other people in the group talked about how they got into their trajectories in life and things like that. So yeah, that's the
What I
story.
love about that, Damon, is when you talk about you were there to compress time, and speed, right? What are some of the things you learned from Russell being in the group, and then maybe some other people that you've connected with in that circle?
The biggest thing that I've learned, because I've been really slow to implement a lot of the tactical things, because there's lots of amazing tactical things, but one thing that's largely different for me than others in the group is that I already have a successful agency. And so I have like a company. And a lot of other people in the group have really great promotional products. And so they're often repackaging them. And so I was really hesitant to like I didn't want to fix what wasn't broken and get distracted by leaving my attention on the agency. And the first year I was in the group, that was really hard because I'd see these people do like these $1 million days, and it's because they do these promotional things. And I'm like, that's cool, that's exciting, but if I do that, I'm gonna take away my attention here. And so I just kind of went with my gut and didn't jump out of the plane. And I'm glad, because then like a year or two later, then other people would be like, you made the right decision. Yeah, I had $1 million day, but I almost lost everything doing it. And so the tactical stuff I'm only now starting to implement, because now I have a COO. Now the agency's in good hands. Now I can start launching these other things. Now I can go more into this world. So I feel like I'm just at the tip of the iceberg. The stuff that I have implemented is largely get out of your own way. And what I see a lot, and the way that Russell says it, is leave a man behind. And so what he means by that is perfect something, then pass the baton to somebody else and let it become their baby. And so that's one thing I've tried to do. And the other thing I've tried to do is get better at implementation. Um, I'm a thinker, and not to the point of analysis paralysis, but but I like to I like to analyze like all the paths and options and pros and cons, and it delays me implementing things sometimes. And so I've been a lot better about deciding what the direction is, and then letting somebody else figure out how to get there instead of me having to figure out how to get there. So probably those things, right? Get out of your own way, and to your other point about what I've learned from other people, what's been fascinating is seeing how other people make money. Like, there's some really interesting businesses out there that A, I wouldn't have even known really existed to begin with, but B, at the scale in which they exist.
I can relate to what you were saying, Damon, because I think when I took the Colby score, I don't know if you're familiar with that, I'm a
Yeah,
very high fact finder.
I'm a 9. Yeah,
So I definitely like dig in. So I've tried to accelerate my fact finding, as opposed to, because I could
yeah,
probably draw it out forever. But so I can relate
yeah.
to that for sure. I like to have all the stuff when I'm making a decision. Talk about the COO for a second.
Mhm.
And the onboarding, because it's a big decision to bring on a CO that, that obviously frees your time. It helps with the team. What was the onboarding like to get them up to speed to do what you wanted them to do and what they felt they can help propel the company to do?
So I was slow to hire COO because I knew it was such an important role that it'd probably be more painful to hire wrong than to just suffer for a while. So I kind of just suffered and juggled more than I should have. But I think it was the right call, because I was able to find a good person on the first hire. And so this person came into my world. They were actually the gatekeeper to a client. And so they were a contractor for a client. And when him and I engaged, we could quickly see each other's morals and, passion for not only what we did, but integrity and how we did it. And this client ended up, unfortunately, kind of screwing both of us. And him and I had kind of stayed in touch, and he's in San Diego, and I go to San Diego a lot just to get out. And so one time I met up for coffee, and just kind of stayed in touch. And then I asked if he wanted, because he was an independent contractor, like he didn't have a day job, he just worked for miscellaneous companies. And so I asked if he wanted to pick up some of our overflow. And so he did some of our overflow, and then he did really good at that. And so then I said, "Do you want to kind of do some project management?" He did good at that. And I remember I was sitting in my front yard, just kind of pacing the sidewalk, doing whatever. And I was thinking about all the gaps I'm trying to fill. Like, what are the specific problems I'm trying to solve with this role? And then at the same time, I see how his name is Vlad. At the same time, I was thinking, what are all the problems that Vlad's trying to solve? And Vlad was trying to solve consistency in clients. He also had a pain point where, some would pay and some wouldn't. And I'm like, well, wait a second. He said, he likes our consistency. He never has any problems with pay from us. He fills the gaps that I have. I'm like, why don't I ask Vlad? And so then we
It's
kind
like
of
one
did
of
like
those
a
head slap moments.
yeah, so we did a trial kind of in the role, and then I'll tell you what's most interesting about hiring a COO, or for me, was even though I was really confident in this person, I also knew there would be a detrimental mistake at some point, and it just had to happen, right? It's like comes with the territory. And I can't remember if it was like IBM or whatever, but there's like the story about the guy where his lead or CEO or whatever makes like $1 million mistake. And like, this is a true story. I just always forget who it is. And then the reporter, after this mistake happens, asks the owner, and he goes, "Well, when are you going to fire so and so?" He's like, "Never. He just learned $1 million lesson." And so it's like, I kind of feel like that, where I just knew one day this would happen. And so part of it was what I talked about earlier, the mistake with the team not understanding the why. And there was more, there's perfect storm of things that happened kind of under his direction. And now that we're past that, it's kind of like, okay, that rite of passage now happened. Like now we're good.
I'd love to talk about the importance of a personal brand. We were talking about your website, and then I was asking, hey, let's pull out the Damon Burton, not only because you have a cool beard logo on there, but talk about the importance of a personal brand as you do that. I'm going to pull up um, damonburton.com here.
Yeah. The So for us doing a few million a year, we don't have any lead gen, any direct outbound lead gen. And so all of our sales come from only two places. One is referrals from the performance of existing clients, and then two is personal brand, right? So I show up consistently on social media, and I largely only talk about three things. One is obviously SEO, two is business and entrepreneurship in general, and then three is family. Like, I like talking about my wife, I like talking about my kids. And what happens is people will begin to follow you for your area of expertise, but they will convert when they relate to you as a human. And so it was personally rewarding for me, almost therapeutic, to just share. Like, look, there's the Sweet Process logo right there.
We got it. Boom, right there.
So for me, it was like, I like talking about these things. So I just started talking about these things. I'll actually go a step back. This process is relatively new. It's about 3 years old, because before I used to be really private on social media. I was only on Facebook. And those of you that have been on LinkedIn long enough, you know that it used to just be a resume site. And so before it became like a social media site, I was only on Facebook. And then, like, if somebody would ask me an SEO question, I would kind of ignore them. Or if somebody would reach out for business, like, I wouldn't accept them. And I just kept it as my private space for friends and family. And what happened was, I was good at filtering my content wall. And so it wasn't like anything dramatic. I just realized it was unproductive. And so I actually turned it off. And when you delete Facebook, it doesn't really go away. Like, you can just turn it back on the next day. So I was like, no, I'm gonna get you, Zuckerberg. And so I deleted everything. I didn't just turn it off. I started deleting every post I'd ever made. And then I realized how long this was gonna take. So I asked my wife if she would help. And so for 3 weeks, she deleted every post I'd ever made, every comment I had made on somebody else's wall, deleted all my private messages, and then unfriended everybody, wiped it out. Then I turned it off. And so what happened after that was, a couple weeks went by, and I had a client. Like, I had somebody that was a friend first and then became a client, and now I couldn't talk to them because we had gone through they got through that filter, and we had chatted through Facebook. And I'm like, there's no way I'm turning this whole thing back on just for one person. So let's pick an intention. And so then I went through this internal struggle of like, okay, well, I like talking about, my wife and kids, but how does that attract a business audience? And if I talk about business, that's going to bore my friends and family. And eventually I was like, but those are me. Those are the things I like. So whatever, I'm just going to do it. And so I went through this process where, for me, it was about 3 months of going, what is my voice? What do I talk about? What do I feel comfortable with? And an example of what I feel comfortable with is, like, I like talking about my wife and kids, but I never disclose my kids' names. I never show identifiable pictures of them. But unless you listen to this interview, I talk so intimately about them that you would never notice that. And so from that, started to become private
You're
messages.
maintaining a certain privacy, even though you're
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah. And so that invites people into your world. People start messaging, and I started getting lots of like, hey, I appreciate how you lead as a father or as a family man. But then that started to, like I said, when people start to relate to you as a human, that's when they convert on business. Then that's when I started to get the messages going. That was really cool what you said about your wife. Here's my website. Can you check it out? And so coming full circle, the personal brand question is personal branding is probably at least matched, if not outpaced, our referrals.
I love it. Well, Damon, I want to be the first one to thank you. I know you have to get to a speaker who, started or sold a
I
$100
don't even know
million
who it is.
company.
Yeah,
So
surprise.
a mystery speaker, since you're at the ClickFunnels headquarters, but I really appreciate you showing up today and sharing your lessons. I want to encourage people to check out SEOnational.com. You can also check out DamonBurton.com and more episodes of the podcast. And Damon, thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Jeremy.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.